Hello, everybody, and welcome to Bring On the Bad Guys, brought to you by Daventry Studios. Of course, Bring On the Bad Guys is the show where we look at the most nefarious villains throughout comic book history. And today we are taking a look at some of my favorite villains because we're looking at the top 10 Spider Man villains from the 1960s. To appear on this list, a villain had to have first appeared versus Spider Man in the 60s in his comic Amazing Spider Man or Amazing Spider Man the Annual, which were the giant sized issues that came out, surprise, once per year usually, and sometimes had reprints and other fun stuff in it. So, Spider Man's Rogues Gallery, I've been really excited to do this show about them because other than Batman, there's not another Rogues Gallery that's as good as Spider Man's. So, without further ado, we move forward to number 10. And number 10 is Electro. And Electro's real name is Max Dillon. He first appeared in Amazing Spider-Man number 9. That was published in February 1964. His place of origin would be Endicott, New York, in the United States of America. And he was created by Stan Lee and Steve Ditko. Moving to the power scale, and a quick review for those of you who might be new about the power scale. 5 categories, 5 points each, possible total of 25. Personality, powers, mythology, design, and cultural impact. The mythology is all of the characters' comic book stories. And cultural impact is everything that takes place outside the pages of comic books. So, movies, TV series, video games, so on and so forth. Electro's personality gets him a 3. Middle of the road. The interesting thing about Electro, one of the interesting things, is that he is almost, you could call him a common thug who happens to have superpowers. And he just usually wants to stick to robbing banks, making a buck, and sometimes getting revenge on Spider-Man. Doesn't have quite the designs of other villains who may want to, take over the world, do things like that, grand scale. He is content with getting by on petty crimes, sometimes amping it up, a little bit. But he's out for himself, nothing really too fancy, although he will help out other villains from time to time to take down Spider-Man. Powers 4. Spider-Man has said that Electro is potentially his most powerful foe. And the thing that limits Electro is that he doesn't quite have the education to quite fully comprehend the extent his powers could reach. So, super powerful character. Obviously, his powers are channeling electricity into, as you can see in the picture, bolts, electric projectiles, and has immunity to being, struck by lightning, hurt by any form of electricity, although he can sometimes be shorted out in certain situations, like with water, for example. Mythology 3. So Electro definitely has some famous battles against Spider-Man, also against Daredevil. He appeared in some early Daredevil comics as well as the Spider-Man comics, is a charter member of the Sinister Six, but isn't really a criminal mastermind, so he hasn't really reached the heights of some of the other villains. Design is a 2, and that's mostly due to his really gaudy electric star mask, which looks really cool in this picture right here, but sometimes just looks really weird and out of place and gaudy. Yeah, so design 2, cultural impact 3, and we saw Electro on the big screen, although some people may want to forget about that particular rendition of Electro. He was played by Jamie Foxx in Amazing Spider-Man 2. And Jamie Foxx, I think he did a good job. He was just given very poor material to work with. And it's also a big difference between the film and the comics as far as origin story goes. They had in the film, Electro falls into a tank of electric eels that are genetically modified. In the comics, he is a line worker who works electric lines, and that's how he gets his powers. Is he's struck by a freak lightning accident that gives him his powers. He was actually approached by Magneto too originally to join the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants and declined. That's just a little side note regarding his early career, but otherwise, one thing we're going to have to do with a lot of these Spider-Man villains is usually with other villains, I'm able to go through and list all the TV shows they've been in or all the video games, etc. These villains have, especially these top 10 from this, kind of golden age of Spider-Man villains, have appeared in so many shows, games, etc., that if I were to list all of them, it would probably take way too long. So just a few quick notes. We talked about Jamie Foxx already, of course. He appears in the recent Spider-Man PlayStation 4 video game. He's one of the Sinister Six in that one. He's also a boss in Marvel Ultimate Alliance 3. So those are a couple of the more recent games that he's appeared in. He's a playable character in Lego Marvel Superheroes 2. And that he also has a Marvel 2099 counterpart that is unlockable in that as well. And I believe he's also an unlockable character in the first Lego Marvel game as well. So, other than that, he has been in quite a few video games and animated series, dating way back to the Marvel Superheroes show from the 60s and the Spider-Man animated series from the 60s as well. Another interesting thing about Max Dillon, Electro, is that sometimes it appears that writers don't quite know what to do with him, and he doesn't quite have the iconic stories or background as some of the other villains, to the point that he's changed a lot from animated series to animated series. So sometimes he's presented like the video game, like the comic book, not video game, version of his character. Sometimes he's a high school classmate of Peter Parker. Sometimes he's not even Max Dillon anymore. In fact, in the Spider-Man animated series in the 90s, which was a fantastic series, he's actually Red Skull's son. And that's just kind of a weird take on him. And it's kind of bizarre for such a great show that was kind of a storyline that didn't quite ring true as compared to the comics. So that is Electro. We're moving on now to number 9, one of my personal favorites, and that is Sandman. And I think my liking of Sandman goes back to when I was a kid, and he was featured as one of the supporting cast in the web of Spider-Man comics that I read at the time. But William Baker is Sandman's real name. Oftentimes he also goes by Flint Marko, and he first appeared in Amazing Spider-Man number 4, way back in September of 1963. He hails from New York City, New York, and was also created by Stan Lee and Steve Ditko. Power scale, personality is a 2. He's not the brightest bulb on the block, but he does realize that. So, for example, he breaks out of prison and realizes that he needs to take down the Fantastic Four, but doesn't have the skills to lead a group to do so. So he and Paste Pot Pete recruit the wizard to do that. And Sandman's actually the first villain to appear on 2 of these episodes, these Bring on the Bad Guy episodes, as he was featured on the Fantastic Four list as part of the Frightful Four. His powers are a 3, and his powers basically include him being able to turn his entire body into sand, and also he can add mass or take away mass from his body by adding or subtracting sand. So if he's in, a part of the world that has a lot of sand in it, aka a desert or something like that, he can add that sand onto his form temporarily and be in control of that. And we saw something like that in Spider-Man 3, where he appeared. Mythology 3, similar to Electro, he's had some fun stories, but none of them where he's really like the star of the show. The Web of Spider-Man tales in the 90s were an interesting time for Sandman. He also was a backup on-call member of the Avengers for a little bit, although that didn't really last very long, as his turning over a new leaf ended up not sticking. Design 3, he has this iconic green striped shirt that he appears in many times, and nothing that great, nothing that awful, just middle of the road. Artists get to have quite a bit of fun with his different sand formations, though, and that oftentimes ends up looking pretty cool. Cultural impact is a 4, and he's been on the big screen, and he showed up in Spider-Man 3, and there was definitely a controversial aspect to that version of him, as he's shown to have something to do with Uncle Ben's death, which kind of wrecks the whole point of the lesson that Peter learns: with great power comes great responsibility, and was one of the reasons why Amazing Spider-Man where Spider-Man 3 fell in the eyes of critics. Just not a great movie. He's also, of course, appeared in quite a few video games and TV shows. There is a super fun Sandman level in Spider-Man Shattered Dimensions where he basically creates a bunch of a sand army, and Spider-Man has to take them down, as well as fight, this giant sandstorm and a giant Sandman and all this fun stuff. So that is Sandman. He gets a total power score of 15 at number 9. Oh, I should talk about his origin story really quick. The movie actually gets his origin story pretty correct. He, again, another experiment gone wrong, gets trapped in a scientific experiment that is looking at, different effects of radiation and energy on particulates such as sand, and he is trapped in there, gets his superpowers, and the rest is history. And we go to number 8, and that is Scorpion. And I do have to admit that the first time I went through these villains, I definitely underrated Scorpion. So I'm glad I went through again and reevaluated things, because he definitely is more impactful than I was remembering the first time around. So his real name is Mac Gargan, and he first appeared in Amazing Spider-Man number 20 as Scorpion. Mac Gargan actually appeared the issue before, in issue number 19. But Scorpion himself, complete with his superpowers, first appearance, Spider-Man 20. And he is from New York City as well, and was created by Stan Lee and Steve Ditko as well. His personality is a 2, like Sandman, not the brightest bulb, but does, have that knack for surviving in the criminal world and working it out with his fellow criminals, making okay plans against Spider-Man, etc. Powers 3. So all of Scorpion's powers really stem from this experiment that happened in his origin, which we'll get to in a second. And they derive also from his suit, which provides him armor, claws, the scorpion tail, which can hold venom and poison, and also other weaponized things like lasers or energy emissions and the like. Mythology is a 4, and this is where I kind of forgot the first time through. Is, Mac Gargan was the third person to wear the Venom symbiote outfit, obviously decades after he first appeared, and was actually Venom for a decent amount of time in his story. And of course, nothing can beat Eddie Brock Venom, but Mac Gargan Venom was halfway decent. And he had a run in like the Dark Avengers, Thunderbolts, where he posed as Spider-Man in some cases. And then, of course, he's had consistent appearances throughout the years. Actually, against Miss Marvel in the 70s is another kind of high point for him in his story. Design is a 3. Again, we have to kind of balance out some of the clunkier renditions of his costume with the sleeker look that he's gotten more recently. And that ends up at a 3. Cultural impact 4. And of course, aside from the video games and animated series, is we also have his appearance in the MCU as just Mac Gargan. So not Scorpion yet. But if you are familiar with Spider-Man Homecoming, there's a scene on a ferry where Spider-Man is trying to disrupt what he perceives as an illegal drug deal. And Mac Gargan is there. He is one of the thugs, gangsters, whatever you want to call him, that is helping facilitate the deal. And he gets busted by Spider-Man, and then with some additional help from Iron Man at the time as well. And then he also shows up at the end of the movie in the after credits scene trying to get Spider-Man's secret identity from Vulture. There's also a version of Spider-Man in Into the Spider-Verse. It's a little different, though, so we won't really go into that. But he is a playable character and a boss in Spider-Man Friend or Foe. And he also shows up in both Amazing Spider-Man video games and in the recent Spider-Man PlayStation game, where he's one of the bosses and members of the Sinister Six. And his total ends up being at 16 for all that. So Scorpion's origin, a bit of a tragic one. So Mac Gargan is convinced by J. Jonah Jameson, the editor of the Daily Bugle, that he needs to participate in this experiment to take down Spider-Man. And Jameson has this great idea. Scorpions are natural enemies of spiders. They're stronger, yada, yada, yada. So we're going to turn you into a scorpion. The experiment is a success in that it enhanced Mac, so he has superhuman strength and agility and dexterity, but also kind of traps him in this scorpion outfit. And of course, Gargan isn't too happy about that. Doesn't like Jonah anymore either. Still, of course, doesn't like Spider-Man, and that's how he first came into contact with the web slinger back in his early days. And has annoyed Spidey to this day, of course. Moving to number 7, we have the Lizard. And his real name is Dr. Kurt Connors. His first appearance is Amazing Spider-Man number 6 from November of 1963. And his place of origin is Coral Gables, Florida, in the U.S., of course, and was created by Stan Lee and Steve Ditko. His power scale goes as such: a personality of 2. He's a giant lizard. Lizards aren't known for having great personalities. Of course, there is some human rattling around in that lizard brain of his, and that human is very smart. His powers are at a 3. Again, giant lizard, sharp teeth, sharp claws, increased strength, increased dexterity, agility, and he can communicate with other reptiles mentally. And mostly his plots involve some variety of taking over New York or the country or Earth with help from reptile friends. And so his powers get a 3, as well as his mythology, kind of like the Sandman and the people that we've run into before on this list already tonight. Not really a mastermind that really puts huge footprints in the Marvel Universe, but a very consistent foe for Spider-Man, of course. Design 4, again, we go back to the guy's a giant lizard. Just looks cool. Of course, the iconic purple pants and white lab coat accompany the lizard after most of his transformations. Cultural impact 4. And we saw Kurt Connors in the Sam Raimi Spider-Man trilogy. He never turned into the lizard. And in Amazing Spider-Man, the main villain was the lizard. And he looked more like... Is it a Koopa? A Goomba? From Super Mario? Really didn't look that great. I think they tried to stick to the lizard's original look with kind of a more human-esque head and face as opposed to the lizard-like one, but didn't really work that great. So that was a bit of unfortunate creative decision-making in that. But, you can't win them all. Also, the lizard, he was, at least for me, I'm not sure if other areas of the country did different things, but the lizard was in the pilot episode of Amazing Spider-Man, the 90s animated show. So that was the first episode I saw of that show, and really enjoyed it. Really solid kickoff to the story, and a good way to become accustomed to Spider-Man's classic villains. So that's cultural impact, which lands him at a 16. Another fun little bit he had in the animated series in the 90s was in the part of the series where they adapted Secret Wars. The Beyonder chooses the lizard as one of the villains, and Spider-Man and his friends are able to figure out a way to get to Kurt Connors' brain in the lizard's body. So the lizard ends up fighting on the side of the good guys, which is kind of cool. And of course, his origin story, Dr. Connors loses an arm, has to have it amputated, etc., and works on genetic engineering that would allow lizard DNA to be used to have to help humans grow limbs back. And Dr. Connors tries the serum on himself. He gets his arm back. He also turns into the lizard. So that is how the lizard got started, and he has had similarly based run-ins with Spider-Man before, where it's definitely not Connor's choice to become this villain, but kind of almost Hulk-like in how he's linked with him. Moving to number 6, we have the Vulture. Of course, his real name is Adrian Toomes, And he first appeared in Amazing Spider-Man number 2. He's the earliest villain to appear on this list. That was in May 1963, and the Vulture is from New York City, New York, and was created by Stan Lee and Steve Ditko. For his power scale, his personality is at a 3. Again, just kind of middle of the road. Powers 2, he doesn't have any superhuman powers on his own. He has his flight suit, of course, which helps significantly, especially if you're going to get called the Vulture. And then usually some sort of anti-aging serum that helps him stay younger, although maybe not looking younger, but in shape so that he can continue to rob people and make Spider-Man's life miserable. Quick note about his origin. His origin involved, he had a business partner. His business partner was crooked, and Adrian found out and wanted to get revenge against all the embezzling and dishonesty that his business partner had undertaken. And soon after that, he went on a crime spree, robbing different people and organizations in the city of New York, and was actually the first supervillain to be photographed by Spider-Man. When the Vulture came around, that was when Spider-Man had the idea to take pictures of the villains and of Spider-Man himself fighting and turn them into Jameson to get money. So that is the start of a very iconic, of course, aspect of the Spider-Man mythology. Design 3. His iconic design is, as is shown in the picture, very close to what an actual Vulture, like with the neck cuff, and I guess vultures aren't really green, are they? But bald head and so on. It's always been a weird look to me, and they've updated a little bit towards the later years, but still we're going to stick with a 3. Iconic, not necessarily the most pleasing to look at. Cultural impact we have as a 5, and that is, of course, due to Michael Keaton's performance as the Vulture in Spider-Man Far From Home. And it always seems like a Spider-Man video game is never complete unless there is a level where you are flying after the Vulture and having to turn your web-slinging self on a dime to try to catch up with him. And he got away from me a lot. We'll just say that. And, of course, Vulture was also in the recent Spider-Man PlayStation 4 game as one of the Sinister Six, which is true of him in the comics as well. Moving to number 5, Mysterio, a.k.a. Quentin Beck. And Mysterio first appeared in Amazing Spider-Man number 13 in June 1964, although technically Quentin Beck appeared way back in Amazing Spider-Man number 2 as one of the henchmen working for the terrible Tinkerer. And that was actually retconned quite a bit later. But first appearance of Mysterio, the full villain, Amazing Spider-Man number 13. His place of origin, we finally move off the East Coast, Riverside, California, and Stan Lee and Steve Ditko, once again, creators. Personality 3, so Mysterio is a decent leader, again, middle of the road, which is why he gets a 3. Powers 2, Mysterio does not have any superpowers. All of his technology is what makes him dangerous. So illusions, hypnotism, lights, lasers, holograms, he is an expert in all those fields and can really use them to give you a run for your money if you're fighting against him. The Mysterio scene in Spider-Man Far From Home, where he is throwing all these illusions at Spider-Man is definitely one of my top favorite comic book movie scenes of all time. Mythology is a 3. The most shocking Mysterio involved story, I would say, would be Old Man Logan by Mark Millar. And Mysterio has a very shocking part in that whole crisis and dystopian future. Otherwise, he hasn't really risen to the level of some of the other villains on here, where he is making trouble for the whole world or really expanding their powers. So, Mysterio, Quentin Beck, he, interestingly enough, we'll get to there. We'll get there. I don't want to get ahead of myself. Design the classic fishbowl head, and I know some people aren't a fan of it, but I personally love the fishbowl helmet, head, whatever you want to call it, and I'm super glad that they decided to stick with it for the MCU version of the character. Also, I've always liked his square, I don't think you can call them cuffs. Can you call them cuffs? But always I thought those are kind of cool. And that gets him a 4 in the design category. Cultural impact, 5. Jake Gyllenhaal, of course, portrayed Mysterio in Spider-Man Far From Home, and Mysterio's shown up in tons of video games, tons of animated shows, and there's this really fun Sinister Six, although I guess they're called Insidious Six in the Spider-Man 90s show, where one of the villains knocks down a bunch of Mysterio's holocubes, and then Spider-Man ends up making a joke about how the warehouse where they're fighting has been transformed to look like an African Sahara, and you have to watch out for dangerous animals like rhinos and scorpions, and of course those are all his villains that are actually coming to attack. That gets Mr. Mysterio a total of 17 for our number 5 villain of the week. Oh, I don't want to forget this, but yeah, his origin, very similar to the movie origin, although with a little different motivation in mind, is he thought a life of crime would work out for him. After working in Hollywood didn't work out for him, he decided he would set up Spider-Man. He decided he would try to get Jameson on his side, which really wasn't that difficult. And then, of course, Spider-Man showed everyone, hey, Mysterio's the actual thief that's committing all these crimes that you're accusing me of. And that was it for Mysterio, at least until he got recruited to join the Sinister Six. Number 4, Kraven the Hunter. And his real name is Sergei Kravinoff. He first appeared in Amazing Spider-Man at number 15 in August of 1964. He hails from Volgograd, Russia, and was created by Stan Lee and Steve Ditko. Another surprise. Wait, no, that's not a surprise. Personality 4, Kraven is very charismatic. He is very intelligent, and he knows how to work a room, how to get a crowd on his side. So personality is a 4. Powers are a 3. And Kraven, wouldn't call him superhuman, although he has tracked down some herbs and different, he's used them in different recipes, let's say, and they enhance his physical fighting skills, his hunting skills, give him higher levels of agility and dexterity and strength and heightened senses. And that is something that helps him in his quest to be the world's greatest hunter, which he's pretty much got locked up at this point. And he, of course, through years of study, has also become an expert tracker and expert marksman as well. Mythology 4. And he gets a 4. Kraven is the primary antagonist in the story Kraven's Last Hunt, which is one of the most iconic Spider-Man stories of all time. So that's enough to get him bumped to a 4. He's also had some encounters with Daredevil and some of the other heroes in the Marvel Universe. Design 3. Kraven's costume is interesting in that it's really, you've got the lion, staring at you from his vest. You've got the mane. You've got these leopard or cheetah print pants, and the pants look really weird, but the lion's mane coming off the vest has always been really cool looking to me, and I really enjoy that. So it kind of all weighs itself out and ends up at a design of 3. Cultural impact 4. A lot of video game and TV animated show appearances for Kraven the Hunter. Shattered Dimensions, Spider-Man Shattered Dimension has a fun Kraven level where you have to get through the jungle and get to Kraven to defeat him. And Kraven actually first came to the U.S. to hunt down Spider-Man and pretty much ignored Jameson's requests to team up for something along those lines. As far as movie future for him, we haven't seen him on the big screen yet. There's a whole bunch of different rumors going on. Sony is thinking about doing a Kraven solo movie, apparently. The directors of Spider-Man Far From Home have indicated that they would really like to see Kraven in the third movie, which makes sense provided that they stick with things consistently from the end of Far From Home. And he also was being recruited, and by that I mean Marvel was trying to get the rights to the character to appear in Black Panther, but that didn't quite happen as well. So we're not quite sure if that interest still remains for any future Black Panther installments. Number 3 might come as a bit of a surprise to some of you, but hopefully not too many of you, and that is Wilson Fisk, the Kingpin. And he first appeared in Amazing Spider-Man number 50. That would be from July 1967, and he hails from New York City and was created by Stan Lee and John Romita Sr. And the Kingpin, of course, primarily known today as a Daredevil villain, but he had his start with Spider-Man in the mid to late 60s. His personality gets him a rank of 5, and the Kingpin is one of the most shrewd, conniving, intelligent, street-smart individuals in all of Marvel, and very good at planning, very good at convincing you to be on his side. Powers are 3. He is a regular human, but a lot of people mistake his stature for fat. It's not. It is mostly muscle, and so he is a very, very tough opponent, especially when you consider that he has taken extensive training in a lot of cases of using hand-to-hand weapons or hand-to-hand combat. Mythology 5, a lot of great stories with Kingpin. His first fights against Spider-Man were great. The appearance of the Schemer, who turned out to be Kingpin's son, who went on to become the Rose. And then, of course, there's all the Daredevil stories, Mayor Fisk. Lots of really good reading material with Kingpin. Design is a 3. Again, he's just kind of a standard design, usually seen with a white coat, sometimes a ring and a cane, the shaved head. So middle of the road design. Gets there a 3. Cultural impact 5, and he was the villain in the Daredevil film, and he was also the villain in seasons 1 and 3, and then also he showed up a little bit in season 2 of Daredevil. And the rumors are flying whether we'll see a new Kingpin cast for a potential appearance in the MCU, or whether they're going to let that alone, or what the decision is actually going to be. So, nothing particular as far as that goes. As far as video games go, Kingpin has appeared in quite a few. He's actually an unlockable playable character in the Lego Marvel games, and you see him as the first boss you face when you're kind of getting orientated to Spider-Man, the PlayStation 4 game, the recent one. All right. And moving to number 2, we have the infamous Dr. Octopus, real name of Dr. Otto Octavius, and first appearance hails from Amazing Spider-Man number 3, place of origin Schenectady, New York, USA. His creators were Stan Lee and Steve Ditko. His personality sits at 5. He's always been a likable person to one degree or another. As a scientist, people usually got along with him. He's usually a good communicator. He's very convincing. He almost convinced Aunt May to marry him. Didn't quite work. He was kind of foiled at the end by Spider-Man and by Hammerhead, one of the other villains. And also a whiz at science and looked up to by a lot of people. So personality 5. Powers 3. Doc Ock doesn't have any intrinsic powers. It all comes from his arms. So we left it at a 3. Mythology, there's some great stories. Master Planner Saga is one of the great stories. Anytime you see he and Spider-Man fighting above the city, on water towers or along the sides of buildings, always super fun to read those. Design 4. There's not very many villains that have a more iconic look than Dr. Octopus with his metal arms, and also the occasional bowl cut and weird goggles or glasses, which is what keeps him from being a 5. Cultural impact 5. Of course, Alfred Molina played Doc Ock in spectacular fashion in Spider-Man 2, and we haven't seen any other versions of Doc Ock after that on the big screen. And he also is a primary character in the recent Spider-Man PlayStation 4 game, where you unfortunately watch him descend into becoming more and more of a villain and finally snapping in that game. All right. That gets Doc Ock a total of 22 points. And we're hoping to see him again in the MCU, but we'll see if that happens. Of course, number 1 is the Green Goblin. And the Green Goblin, his real name, of course, Norman Osborn. And Norman has been one of the most nefarious villains in all of Marvel history. Gobby first appeared in Amazing Spider-Man 14 and originated out of New Haven, Connecticut. He was created by Stan Lee and Steve Ditko, and his personality is a 5. Norman Osborn, definitely one of the most charismatic but conniving individuals in the Marvel Universe, at least on Earth. Powers 3, there is a bit of Goblin formula that Osborn takes that enhances his strength and his agility and his senses a little bit, and also kind of kickstarts a healing factor. But his weapons are mostly technology-based, either the pumpkin bombs or the razor bats or the electric shocks that he can shoot out of his gloved hands. So that gets him a 3 in that he is adept at what he has, but not superhuman, although the effects of the Goblin formula definitely amplify that. Mythology 5, great library of stories from Green Goblin, including the death of Gwen Stacy, the famous moment in comics that drew the line in the sand. People weren't used to the superhero not saving the day. Green Goblin kidnaps Gwen Stacy, goes to the Brooklyn Bridge with her, sees Spider-Man coming, pushes her off the bridge. Spider-Man shoots the web down, catches Gwen, thinks he saved her life, but she's actually dead, and we never really know if Goblin killed her, if she died from the shock of the fall, if her neck snapped and that's how she died from Spider-Man's web catching her. We just don't know. And it's such a significant moment in comics where a main character actually died. And they died because the hero wasn't able to save them. So very, very influential, very well-known issue. And actually the issues after that are pretty solid too as they continue that story. Design 5, really enough said. You gotta love the Goblin outfit. It's creepy and cackly and cool all at the same time. Cultural impact 5, of course, Willem Dafoe played Osborn / the Green Goblin in the amazing, or not, nope, not amazing. Just Sam Raimi's Spider-Man. That was Willem Dafoe. And even though he looked a little like a Power Ranger, it was a really great performance. And of course, the amount of times that he's been in video games and television shows and anything Marvel related really would take too long to go over. So we're not going to. We're just going to let it be at that. Of course, Norman also would go on to take some other identities such as Iron Patriot or Red Goblin, and those are different stories, but also really solid reading. Norman Osborn, the thorn in Spider-Man's side. Oh, there's Electro again, so we are going to say we made it all the way through, which is awesome. Next time, we're looking at either Ant-Man or maybe some Marvel monsters. That's what's on the docket for now. But thanks for watching. If you didn't get a chance to check out the Funko friends I have here, take a quick look before we're done. They're doing, it's really fun to get these in the mail with such great detail that they've added over the short course of Funko history, as you might call it. Anyway, that's a wrap for the top 10 Spider-Man villains of the 1960s. Hope you enjoyed it, and we will see you next time.